Shooting it raw?
Yes, shooting it raw.
Well, I'll just tell a little anecdote if I could. In 2016, when I did my first Camino trip, when we got to France, my son came with me unexpectedly at the last minute. So anyway, we were in France getting ready to start, and he looks at me and he says, "Mom, why did you bring your travel clock?" And I said, "Well, I've always traveled with my travel clock. I have to have it to help me get up in the morning." He said, "Mom, it's on your phone. You have an alarm." And we kept, everything that I'd pull up my flashlight. "Why did you bring a flashlight? It's on your phone." And of course, the last thing was, "Why did you bring two cameras? You have a camera on your phone." So there's no doubt that having the camera on my phone has made me take more pictures, I would say, than I used to. But my default position is to take pictures of people as opposed to scenic photography. Because I always think if I want postcards, if I buy a postcard, it's going to be a better photograph than I could ever take. So I'm happy with that. Although I know the cameras are so good now on phones that you can take really, really nice photos. So anyway, I use it mainly to take images of people and where we are.
Podcasting remotely can be a real pain. It's quite challenging, but it doesn't have to be. Zencastr has this all-in-one web-based platform and makes the process really quick and easy. That's the way it should be, right? Just focus on the podcast. So let's talk about the quality and the challenge of recording online. So Zencastr gives crystal clear sound and really nice HD video. I know I don't use it, but it's there. Now, that's not even to mention how easy it is to use. Like even for my guests that aren't even that tech savvy. There's nothing to download. They just click on the link and start recording. Zencastr is all about making your podcasting experience easy, and everything from local recording to automatic post-production in the tool. You don't have to leave your browser to get the episode done. Maybe you want to make podcasts as well. I mean, I think it's a great idea personally. Obviously, I'm running one. I think you should make one too. It's easy. Just do it. I actually use Zencastr. If it sounds great, that's because the platform works. And if it sounds like crap, that's because I've done something wrong. But Zencastr really does give me amazing quality for my guests. If you go to zencastr.com/pricing, blah, 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 and enter this promo code, look, it's already long and confusing, and I'll just make it easier by putting the link and the promo code in the episode description. If you do that, you get 30% off your first 3 months. So that's actually pretty sweet. So look in the description for the link and the promo code, and then you get 30% off to start doing your own podcast. Do it. Go for it. Zencastr. That's it. Well done.
Well, no, I see these other podcasts where people, for example, let's say it's ran in Jerusalem running, ran in Jerusalem. Right. And then there'll be ran in Paris running, and so they use their video part of their camera to take a picture of them every place they go, doing the same thing, whatever it is. And I always laugh at those, but I don't try to do that myself.
Okay, so first I have to start from the top. So your name is Julie, it's a little small. Gianelloni Connor?
That's right.
Gianelloni.
You're making it very Italian, which is fine, but it's actually Corsican, which of course is French.
Please hit me. Okay, we will talk to you like this. It is a Gianelloni. This is not too
That's
difficult.
That's it. Okay. Very good, Ran.
Merci.
And as soon as I saw your name, I thought, I wonder if he's Palestinian, because I lived in Israel for 4 years.
Oh, okay. My parents are born in Morocco. I was born in Jerusalem. I have an Israeli passport, so I don't really identify. I mean, look, the people from there, the difference is so marginal. There's cultural difference, but if we did an autopsy of all of us, we all look the same inside. So
Right.
That's kind of my attitude.
Well, I didn't live in Jerusalem, although I went there a lot. But I lived in Tel Aviv because that's where the U.S. embassy was at the time.
Oh, wow.
Actually, I lived in the suburbs the second time I was there because my son was in school. But anyway,
well, we digress.
yeah. But just looking at your bio, I thought, okay, well, we have some points of connection, if I can say that.
Sure. I love that this is like, one person described it as a gift, like meeting people and connecting with people is kind of like undoing a gift, let's say a Christmas gift. So now I ask you to send me 4 images. I have no idea what they are. That's going to frame our conversation. I'll get to learn and share about you. And I'm super excited.
So, yeah, the thing is, almost everybody I deal with is younger than me. I've gotten to that age. I remember when we didn't connect with people across the globe, or if you did, it was by a long distance, very expensive telephone call. No video.
I remember this too.
So for me, it's all kind of magic.
It is.
It's magic.
Absolutely. I agree with you. Shall we dive into your first photo? I'm super excited.
Sure.
Oh, look. What? Okay, what? Okay, so what we have is a photograph that somebody made from the audience onto a small stage with a black curtain. What really pops, well, one of the things that tells me is that whoever made the photograph did it with a camera, whatever, that accidentally focused on the US flag in the background, because that's in super sharp focus. So there seems to be 1 or 2 flags. There's one flag which is the US flag, and I don't know the flag next to it.
U.S. Department of State.
Okay, U.S. Department of State. On the left is a woman looking to her left who is speaking from a kind of a podium. And there's a woman at the podium, both looking at each other almost like peers. Fascinating. I'll let you give. I'll leave a bit of a cliffhanger to say who. Okay, this is a really dramatic photo. So what am I looking at?
So that's me at the podium, and This is March 2009. It's Women's History Month at the U.S. Department of State, and the organization of which I was the president and a founder was having our Women's History Month Day celebration, and the woman seated is Secretary of State Hillary Clinton.
Boom.
Yep. So I would say, because of my career, which is my diplomatic career, I had fabulous opportunities to meet presidents and prime ministers and Hillary Clinton and many other incredible people. So that is a big chunk of my life. 33 years of my professional life was as a diplomat.
As it happens, I moved back from Hong Kong to Canada. So now I'm in Vancouver. I just spent I met a few times with a cousin, and his father was a diplomat. And so that's how, when we first met, it was in Ottawa. His dad was a diplomat. And so my experience of that whole world is obviously from many steps removed. But then when you say that, okay, so where do we go from, we just opened an incredibly amazing door. So I'm going to leave it to you. I'm just going to get out of the way. Please take over.
So I went to graduate school to get my MFA in creative writing. And I had previously studied journalism at my state university in the summer times. So I really thought I was going to be a writer.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where my mind was set, and that's what I thought I was doing. But life gets in the way, and I figured out pretty quickly I had to have a paycheck. So then it was, well, what am I going to do for a career? Not a job, but a career, because I wanted to have an actual career. And many twists and turns, but I ended up taking the Foreign Service exam, which is given, and in those days was given once a year. Mm-hmm. It took me about 3 years from the time I decided to do this until I was offered a job. And I
Wow.
was incredibly lucky because the number of diplomats is very small.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm impressed that you have a relative who is a diplomat, because most people have absolutely no idea what diplomats do.
Mm-hmm.
And if they have a impression of them, it's that they're going to cocktail parties all the time, and
It's from the movies.
yes, it's living a good life, and etc., which is so wrong an impression of what diplomats do that I always am trying, even now after I've retired, to talk when I can about diplomacy, because it's so important, and particularly right now because of the situation in Europe with the Ukraine.
Yeah.
So people don't understand diplomacy. They understand what the military does. They usually have a brother, a father, a son, someone who's been in the military. So they've gotten firsthand accounts of that, but they haven't met or talked with a diplomat. So it's kind of my continuing goal to tell people what diplomats do.
Nice.
And that profession has allowed me to travel the world. I had a relative by marriage who used to say that he got an all expenses paid trip to Europe. And of course, what he was talking about was World War II. So in my case, I got an all expenses paid trip to most of the world thanks to my job.
Wow. So one of the missions of the podcast is to inspire listeners, right? It's to inspire people to realize, okay, we have one life. How do we make every second count? Because, life is a gift. You got a master's in creative writing. So
Right.
my first degree was in creative writing. And I know that when a child comes to their parent and say, I want to go study creative writing, and you can imagine, like, my parents wanted me to become a doctor and a lawyer, first generation Canadians. And I was good in science, but then when I turned to them and I said, you know what? The thinking going on in the creative writing class is much higher than the thinking going on in like the physics and chemistry classes. So that's where I'm going. They were pretty disappointed. And then you go for a master's, and then you say that life got in the way. Well, maybe what it was that the training you got in creative writing actually supported you becoming a very accomplished diplomat. Maybe. I don't know.
No, I think you're absolutely right on that. I've always said that the humanities and the humanities degree teaches you critical thinking and good writing. And those are two skills that any diplomat has to have. So my humanities, both my undergraduate and then my master's degree, prepared me for the career. And by the way, as a diplomat, you write extensively,
Sure.
all the time, because you're reporting back to Washington, and it's usually in written form. And in my case, because of my specialty, I was writing speeches for the ambassador, I was writing briefing memos, I was writing press releases for the media. I was doing all of that. But it's professional writing. It's nonfiction professional writing. It's not the kind of creative writing that you do in a MFA course. So I was writing for the whole 33 years, but not the kind of writing. Well, I did my master's thesis. I did short stories. That's what went into my master's thesis. So it was different writing.
Right.
But I totally agree. As part of my master's degree program, I was, as a teaching fellow is what they call it, I was teaching freshmen and sophomores. And they would come over and I'd ask them what they were doing in their whatever other classes. It was mainly multiple choice and that kind of tests.
Yeah.
Whereas in my class, I had to write 6 essays a semester, plus a midterm and final with essays. So they had to write. But the other professors in other disciplines weren't requiring that.
So I have two questions I have to ask. Okay, so Hillary Clinton at that point, you'll have to remind me, what was her title?
Secretary of State.
She was Secretary of State. Okay. And so can you remember that precise moment of whoever made that photograph? Maybe what you were exchanging with her about, just to give us some flavor of what your presentation was.
Well, it was her first year. It was first March that she was Secretary of State. So we were thrilled that she agreed to be our keynote speaker for Women's History Month.
Mm-hmm.
And I was the president of the organization, so I was there to introduce her. And also at the end of the program, we gave her a plaque about leadership. It's a beautiful quote that we had on leadership. And so she got up and talked about her experiences as a woman, first in a law firm in Arkansas and so forth. And it was very interesting to hear. She's a few years older than I am, but not much, about what it was like to be a woman in a law firm. Because some of the things she talked about, I could say happened to me too, being the only woman in the room, having to ask them to make decisions about your career that you didn't have to make before because they didn't have women.
Sure.
So it was all very interesting, and I know everyone in the room was fascinated to hear what her background is and how she related to women coming up in a man's profession.
Mm-hmm.
There are, unfortunately, some women who experience that, who think they're super women, and they did it, and they're not very sympathetic.
It's magic.
They made it in a man's world, so everybody else should make it in a man's world.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
With no help. Whereas I believe we have a responsibility to help younger women navigate. So, and she very much was in that line. She said at her first law firm that she asked them what their maternal policy was, their policy for maternal leave. So there was none. Mm-hmm. So, the senior partner she was talking to asked her to design one.
Yeah.
So she had to write a policy and then try to get it approved.
Wow. I know we could easily lose ourselves in this one photo. You're very tricky. You're very, very tricky. Okay, so the one other question I wanted to ask was, you wanted to, and maybe the other photographs do this, but just for now, you said you wanted to help dispel or at least raise or increase people's awareness of what diplomacy really is. And I know we can't do it within an hour, let alone 15 minutes or so that I have for each photo, but what is the message is there a message you want to give about diplomacy to help people get their minds around it?
I guess the overall message is American citizens, at least, and I'm sure Canadian citizens too, get their money's worth out of their diplomats.
Mm-hmm.
We are not a 9-to-5 profession, and our informal motto is that we're the first line of defense. Mm-hmm. We're out there in all kinds of countries that tourists don't go. Mm-hmm. And we are there for a reason, to represent U.S. interests. So we do everything we can to represent the United States and to help American citizens who frequently, unfortunately, find themselves in need of help. Yeah. Whether it's they lose their passport or they get arrested or they have a health issue and they have to go to a hospital. They don't know the system. They don't know the language. They don't know how to navigate anything. Who do they call? It's like Ghostbusters, except it's who do they call? You call your embassy for help. Yep. And we are love to help our citizens, to do everything we can. So that's helping our citizens. But then there's this whole other aspect, which is being the representative of the United States government in a foreign country. Yeah. And so what we have to do is to project Americans' values and interests, but also to understand the country we're living in and report that back to Washington. So sometimes, or to wherever your capital is. So this is, we're boots on the ground. We're the first boots on the ground. It's not the military. The diplomats are already there and already reporting if the military then comes in. And so it can be a very dangerous job. And diplomats do lose their lives. In fact, more ambassadors have been killed in the line of duty than generals since World War II. And most of us go to these dangerous places because we know somebody has to go, and so we volunteer. In my case, I volunteered, and I went to Colombia twice, working in the narcotics affairs section, which is anti-narcotics work.
You're not that ambitious. You're fine.
Well, the first time is during the years of Pablo Escobar and the Cali and Medellin cartel, and it was
in Hebrew, you've been to Israel. You say is you went to the juice of the garbage. So in the garbage bag you have the juice inside. That is really where it is at. That was where you went.
Yeah. Well, it was a joke in my family. My brother said wherever I went, revolution broke out.
Yeah. Wow.
But it was the other way around, really. The revolution broke out, and then I went. I volunteered to go. So.
Okay. Well, should we go on to the next photo?
Sure.
Okay, totally different feel here. It looks like the photo of a book cover, yes?
That's right.
And the title is Savoring the Camino de Santiago. It's the pilgrimage, not the hike. And it's like a collage. It's beautifully designed, very warm colors. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6-ish. Well, it looks like a door, but they're like 6-ish images in this like collage. One is of like somebody photographing their feet with their feet in tivas. One is just of a massive cauldron with like, looks like a paella or something. One is just ladles maybe on the wall. One is of a tour bus with a beautiful, maybe
cathedral
church in the background. Right, a cathedral, yeah. And then inside the cathedral as well with the stained glass. So take us on your trip. What is this?
So, as I said, I spent 33 years in the Foreign Service. But before I went to the Foreign Service, I had dropped out of college for 3 years and went to Europe. And I lived in Portugal and taught English in Portugal and then in Spain. And while I was in Portugal, I read a book recommended by my roommate called Iberia by an author named James Michener, who used to be a really, really popular author. People have kind of forgotten about James Michener. But anyway, he wrote this book, Iberia, which I read. And chapter 13 in Iberia is about the Camino de Santiago. So the Camino is a pilgrimage, or an ancient pilgrimage route that goes back to 822 or 824, depending on who you believe, when the burial site of St. James the Apostle was rediscovered in northwestern Spain. So from that year, as soon as it was rediscovered and it was blessed by the bishop and then the pope that this is the burial site of St. James, pilgrims started walking. And of course, we're talking about the 1200s, 1300s, 1400s. There weren't that many places that people went to, but they did do 3 big pilgrimages to Jerusalem, to Rome, and to Santiago de Compostela, which is the place where St. James is buried. And so all through the ages, people have been walking this route. But the popularity after about 1400 decreased until after I read about it. So when I read about it, I was 21 years old. I said, I want to go to this place. I want to see this historic site. And I thought I'm going to do it, but I can't. But I didn't have any money. I was living on the local economy in Portugal. I didn't have the time. So I just filed it away. But when I started thinking, okay, I'm retired now, I decided this was going to be my first long trip. And in the meantime, because of a series of factors, one of them is the movie The Way with Martin Sheen and Emilio Estevez came out. People became aware of the Camino de Santiago in a way they hadn't been. So this whole culture of walking the Camino popped up. And so in that 40 years between when I first heard about it and when I decided to do it, the culture became you have to walk the Camino. So I did. I walked the Camino along with my son. And when I set out, I didn't plan to write a book. But by the end of it, I thought, okay, maybe there's a book here that I should write. Wow.
So how far is the journey itself?
It's from wherever you want to start.
Oh.
But it must end in Santiago de Compostela. I say it must end. Some people will do it in stages, so they might only have a week's vacation. They'll do 1 week and do from here to there, and then the next year they'll pick up and go from there to the next there, and so forth. Right. But the most popular route is called the French route, and so you start in France, you go over the Pyrenees, and then you follow the most traveled route from the Middle Ages. So that's the French route, and that's the one I did. It's 500 miles. From Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port in France all the way to Santiago de Compostela. So it's interesting, Rand, that you brought up the cover, because when I was doing my book, I knew I wanted a mosaic, but I didn't know how to make it? How do you know how to work it? How to frame it? So I actually hired an artist to frame it for me. And he did. He came up with the framing that you saw, which I was very happy with. And then we had to get the photos. And then we started fighting a little bit on the photos. Because I knew, for example, I wanted a food shot. I wanted a transportation shot. I wanted a cathedral shot. So I could say, I want, from these different areas, I want a photo. But then, like for the food shop, he sent me things that were maybe really artistic, but they didn't work as far as I was concerned.
Yeah, it didn't,
It was like half a picture of sangria, and you would have to know it was a picture of sangria to figure out what that image was. So I said, no, I just want something, a whole picture of sangria or paella. He said, oh no, that's too touristy, that's too common. I said, look, this is being written for people who are going to be learning about the Camino. So anyway, but we ended up with the cover, and I was really happy with it.
When did you finish writing this?
Well, okay, that's a whole nother story. When I came home in 2016, I thought I would write it in a year. But in 2017, Hurricane Harvey hit Houston, where I live. And so my house was flooded, and it took me 10 months. We were not in our house and trying to get it fixed and moved back in. So, the time just keeps ticking on. And so in 2019, I said, for my New Year's resolution, I'm going to finish this book. I think it's the only time in my whole life I've actually kept my New Year's resolution. So
now, listen, I am very pleased to say that you are the second person in Houston who was affected by Hurricane Harvey, that I have on the podcast. The previous person, many episodes ago, his house was destroyed. Being in Hong Kong, I knew it was bad. And then seeing the photographs, I was like, oh, it's really bad. And then when we spoke, I really got a deep connection with how bad that was. So it's really fascinating that as we talk, all these little things come up. So for example, I mentioned that what the mission of the podcast is, but the four main pillars are creative expression. So that's really about photography and art. Okay, less important for you. One of them is service leadership, which is something that I've focused on professionally, which you kind of talked about. And then the other one is strong women, which absolutely, here you are. It's fantastic. And there's another one that I don't remember at the moment. It makes me look really bad, but doesn't matter. But the point is, well, creative expression, if actually writing is a creative expression, that's it. So maybe not visual, but for sure.
Absolutely. But I had a real idea in my head of what I wanted the cover to be like. But I don't have the graphic skills or the photographic skills to be able to do that myself. Okay. So I got someone, and then we collaborated. I told him what my vision was, and then he helped me realize my vision. For sure.
And I mean, that's a book. That is a book. I mean, you create the narrative and you capture the narrative, and you don't necessarily need to have like in a certain way. Like, for example, one of the people on the podcast was talking about how actually maybe she lives in Texas as well. She might actually live in Houston as well. She's Brazilian, and she writes romance novels. And then she said that she writes her books in English. And then I said, so have you translated it into Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese? And she goes, no, because they actually suggest that you don't do that. That if you are going to translate your book, that even if you have the language, you shouldn't do it because you're going to want to change it. And it makes perfect sense that you're going to be like, well, I need some help to create the cover, because maybe you need that other person to look at it and go, okay, well, let's work this through. I love it. It looks great.
Absolutely. The artistic expression comes in many ways, but this is one thing about publishing nowadays. I took a lot of photos on the trip, and a lot of photos that you won't see elsewhere, but I couldn't publish them in my book in color as I would have liked to, because the book would have cost so much nobody would buy it.
Right.
So I ended up only using black and white photos in my book, which are not the best. They didn't translate from color photos to black and white as best.
Sure.
But I had my blog, so I published all of those photos on my blog. And I would I have it in the book, readers should go to the blog to see the photos. But
So
people don't do that.
listeners should go to the blog, which is
CaminoForBoomers.com.
I love it.
Let's see, at first I thought I would be writing about the special circumstances or difficulties that older people have.
Right.
But it turns out that probably the majority of people walking the Camino are retired people because we have the time to do a long journey. So anyway, along the way I said, okay, I'm not writing this for boomers anymore. I'm just writing it for anybody.
Yeah. Would you like to go to the next image? This is so fun. So wait. Before I do that, how many books have your name? How many books have you completed to date?
2.
Okay, respect. So this one's Savoring the Camino de Santiago. Yeah, I love it. Makes me want to go on a journey. Amazing. Okay, next photo. Well, here we go. Different. It's also a book cover, and this one's called Whiskers Abroad. Ashi and Audrey's Adventures in Japan. Oh, wait a second. This doesn't give the feel. Maybe it is a nonfiction book, but I kind of get the feeling it's not. It's got 3 very stylistic, beautiful suitcases of small, descending size, kind of stacked on top of each other. One side has a very kind of stylized, sort of Japanese print with cranes on it. Sitting on on the base suitcase is a very nice gray cat. Is this your cat?
No, it's not.
Okay, a nice gray cat. Behind, almost coming out of the cat's ear, is Japan. Kind of like the map of Japan. Not too detailed, but you can sort of see. And then the background is kind of like a map. So it gives like this feeling of adventure, and it's like a map of kind of a slice of Asia. And so tell us about Whiskers Abroad.
So I did not write this book, but I am publishing this book.
Oh, okay.
So
right, because this is written by Carrie Carter.
Right. Besides being an author myself, I also have this micro press that I run. Carrie Carter is my latest author, and she wrote this wonderful book called Whiskers Abroad, Ashi's and Audrey's Adventures in Japan. So as a publisher, I set out what areas I wanted to work in. So travel, international affairs, history, and anything to do with Houston. So
Okay.
Carrie Carter walked across my transom, and here she is, and her book meets 2 of the 4 categories. I read it, and it is so hilarious.
Okay.
The way it's written is a writer is invited to go to Japan to write a magazine article. And she goes, but she takes her cat with her. So her cat's name is Ashi. So the book is arranged every day of their trip. The writer, whose name is Audrey, she gives her recounting of what happened that day. And then the cat tells you what really happened. And it's like, you can't believe the difference between these 2 versions of what happened. The cat is so funny, saying, every day he's saving the woman from sure disaster. He's rescuing her. He's her cat in shining armor. And the things just the craziness that she has or she does, it's so funny. But
Right.
to answer your first comment, you're absolutely right. When I first got this book, I thought, how am I going to classify this? Is it fiction? Well, yeah, a cat can't write and talk. But it's also nonfiction because the information about Japan that you get as you read the book is fabulous. It's fabulous for a first-time person going to Japan. What should I see? What should I do? Where should I go? So it's both nonfiction and fiction. And so we talked about it a while and worked on it. And we call it a travel log, which is really what it is. Kind of in the mode of what, for example, Mark Twain used to do when he would do these travel books. They were part real and part made up. And that's what this book is.
When I saw it, I, for some reason, made the connection to Haruki Murakami. In Murakami's books, he always has a cat, right? And the thing about Murakami, which is great, is that I think most of the Japanese books that I've read tend to be kind of traditional, very kind of mired in tradition, in the history of the great Japan. Whereas Murakami, it's like, today, guy's got a, jazz bar, and it's very contemporary. And so then as you're telling me about kind of what it's like, you've got the cat. I could totally see how somebody writing who has a flair for this could really, because to go traveling with your cat is itself kind of peculiar. I love it. It's really funny.
Right. And the other thing, for me, it's so interesting. My son has been telling me for years, Mom, you should write a graphic novel, which
Okay.
I don't think is my skill set. But this book is not a graphic novel, but it is heavily visual.
Right.
We
Right.
have a designer, Stacy Vickers, and she is incredible. I mean, every page is a
Yeah.
visual delight.
Nice.
So, and you see Audrey and you see Ashi, the cat, and they're in Japan, and you're going, how did she get these images?
Oh,
How
wow.
did she get these images? And so, but it's wonderful. It's wonderful to look at, just to
Yeah.
look at.
How do people get this book?
Well, it's not even out yet. It's up for pre-sale on
Oh,
Amazon.
you're just teasing us.
Well, at first I thought we were going to launch it in June, and then we
Okay.
decided to delay it a little bit so we could give it more pre-sale publicity. So it's up on Amazon now for sale.
Nice. Nice.
And we're giving it a special pre-sale price to try to boost the number of people that'll buy it and then start spreading it. Because
Sure.
I promise you, anybody that reads this book is going to love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's got so much going for it. I mean, they're the cat lovers. They're the
Yeah,
people
yeah.
who like travel. They're the people who want to learn about Japan. It's
Yeah.
just, it hits so many things that people can love about it.
This person who gets some training in creative writing suddenly realizes, wait a second, I need a career, goes into the foreign service, becomes a diplomat, travels the world, comes back to the US, does all of these highly focused, supportive programs to help women also kind of develop however they will. And then you kind of go through this thing to write a book, you write your book, and then you decide to be, this, I'm assuming this is the sequence, and then you decide to be a book publisher. How do you explain that evolution?
See, for me, it's a circle. Remember I said I started out thinking I was going to be a writer,
Yeah.
and then I went through this career, and then I retired, and I'm back to being a writer. The additional piece, besides just me going through what I, continuing to do what I always did, writing, but now doing it myself as opposed for the government, is there's been a revolution in the publishing industry, just like there's been a revolution for newspapers. All of those newspapers that have folded, now we're down to 4 or 5 really big newspapers in the US, and that's it.
Yeah.
The same thing has happened in publishing. Of all the publishing houses that used to exist, there are 4 really big New York publishers now. But there's been an explosion of small presses and independent presses. And so when I realized that if I wanted to go with a traditional New York publisher, it was going to be at least 3 years by the time you find an agent, and then the agent places your book, and then they edit your book, and then they do advanced marketing. That's a minimum is 3 years.
And it gets a window of about 1 to 2 months of actual promotion, and then
That's correct. And that's if they accept your book, which there's no guarantee. So I said, I'm too old. I can't wait 3 years for this to happen. So I went to start learning about another route. And the new route, of course, is because of printing and digital printing and printing on demand, you don't have to go through a big press. You can go through a small press. And so I'm learning all these things. I'm taking courses on publishing. I'm finding out about publishing. And then it occurs to me, I'm spending more time learning than I really ever planned on. But if I have to do it for me, I might as well offer this to other people as well.
right.
So that's when I said, okay, I'm going to be a publisher.
You're such a mensch.
The thing is, I have absolutely bad timing, though, because I opened my micropress, which is what I call it, right before COVID hit.
Okay, now I would like you to do a little thought experiment. Think about all of the people on the planet. All of them having, in their month, aspirations or dreams to do something. Some of them are, ambitious, and maybe most of them are not. And pretty much everybody I've talked to said, and then the pandemic happened, and that just changed everything. Like with you. But here you are, like whiskers abroad. Look at that. It's amazing.
So the interesting thing for me is because of the pandemic, because I couldn't do what I thought I was going to be doing, which was go to a lot of book festivals and go out and be marketing my book in person. I couldn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
I was
Mm-hmm.
trapped at home. But that led to me, my first book, Savoring the Camino, for example, I made it into an audiobook, which I would
nice.
never have done otherwise.
You reading or somebody else reading?
Well, somebody else reading, but
Okay.
it's a whole process to find your narrator and then work
Yeah.
with them to get your audiobook up. Anyway, I thought I would only have originally the paperback and an ebook, but I ended up with those two plus the audiobook plus a hardback, which I never planned to do. I wouldn't have done except I had the time to work on that during the pandemic. And the second book I wrote, it was a pandemic project. I would never have done that because I already knew what I wanted my second book to be, and it wasn't this. But for my second book, I had to travel. Couldn't travel during COVID, so I did something else. And so I came up with a book which I never planned to do. And I also I started writing short stories. Again, going back to my beginning, that's what I did. And I submitted them to different competitions. And four of my stories then went into story anthologies.
Nice.
And that's another area I would never have explored except for the pandemic. So
fantastic.
I kept myself busy.
So just to kind of weave in the little bits that I can. So I was super science oriented. And then I did this one course in the college in the short story. And then the professor read, a short story from Anton Chekhov. And that one class completely changed my whole thinking and essentially rechanneled my life. So how do we tie all this back to raising awareness of what it is to be a diplomat?
Tie it all back. Well, I think people should think of a diplomat as being their eyes and ears overseas. As I said, the first line of defense, we let people know, should you go to Israel right now? Is it a good time to visit Israel? Because we post travel warnings, travel advisories. And if you contact the embassy, they will tell you what they think the situation is.
Or Hong Kong.
Or Hong Kong, wherever. And we feed all that information back to the American public through websites, our embassy websites, but also through the Department of State. So I continue, I think, to be eyes and ears, but about the whole world.
Right.
So I think I mentioned earlier, I was actually scheduled to do a podcast on the day that Russia invaded Ukraine to talk about my books.
Right.
But I started out talking about Ukraine and about the importance for the world of what was going on. And most Americans at that point still really didn't understand what was happening.
So Ukraine happens. My head explodes. I've been trying to have more people connected to the Ukraine on the podcast, and I've had 2 so far. One of the comments that I heard recently was she proposed that, people really notice what's going on in Ukraine because the people there are a lot like us. They're white and they're middle class and whatever. How could this happen over there? I mean, there are so many other conflicts that we could also be paying attention to. But I've also read and felt the analysis that this is actually a very different kind of conflict. So feeding from your experience. Oh, you got me riled up. Feeding from your experience, how would you say, or is the what happened in Ukraine different, or is it a watershed moment? Is it what people think it is?
Yes, it is a watershed moment. Starting at the end of World War II, the United States, working with its allies, created a world order, a system, a framework for international affairs. And because of that framework that was created, there have been no major wars in Europe since 1945.
Yeah.
This framework established peace in Europe. And now, because of Ukraine, the framework has been challenged.
Yeah.
And if Russia wins, it will be essentially shattered.
Right.
So who knows what the future will bring? Do we go back to great power rivalry as we had in past centuries, or Germany might fight France, or Germany fight Russia, or who knows? The Russians have said, we do not accept the current world system. Now, although that world system was very effective in Europe, it was less effective in other parts of the world for various reasons, but still, for many years, we haven't had another world war.
Yeah.
We've had a lot of regional wars, a lot of smaller wars, but it's kept us from a world war. And Russia is trying to break that system.
Yeah. And I know that's a very difficult question. And I know that we have to move on to the next photograph. I wish my podcast isn't at this stage where it's kind of like video and audio, but you have a warmth to your smile and your face that comes to me through the audio. And I really appreciate your time. Wow, I feel like I'm at the table with a master. This is great.
Well, thank you, Ben. I love my career, my diplomatic career, and I love my current work in writing. So I'm glad that my enthusiasm about both areas comes through, even just in an audio presentation.
Oh, for sure. For sure it does. Let's go to the next photo. Okay, now, look what... Okay, so this photograph is mind-blowingly amazing. Okay, so do you know who the photographer is? Is it you who made this photograph?
Talk about the photograph a little bit, Ran.
Okay, so it's a super beautiful, in terms of, if you're into the visual element of how photographs are rendered, it's a hyper crisp, beautiful shot of a church. And in front of the church, I'm assuming it's a church. Yeah, it's a church. In front of the church is this white horse wearing the various, I don't know, horse, the bridle and all this stuff with the saddle. And on it, I can't tell who it is, but it's a person, a figure, smiling with potentially jeans and a jacket. Is that you?
That's me.
What a great photo. It's so good.
Again, talking about going back to the beginning, I grew up not in a city, but in the country. So I grew up riding horses. I've always loved horses.
Nice.
And another way to experience the Camino de Santiago is to ride a horse, to go by horseback.
Okay.
So the photo is actually of me in front of the cathedral. It's in Santiago de Compostela. There are not many people who ride horseback on a pilgrimage, and there are very few people who get that photo, which is one person, me, on a horse in front of the cathedral, nobody else. Because usually in that square in front of the cathedral, it's thronged with pilgrims and so forth. So this is an incredible shot. So to answer your first question, that photo was taken by another person who also did this horseback Camino with me. And I'd pass people my phone so they could take a picture of me on horseback on the trip.
Can you talk about the architecture? Because I'm too dumb to really address it. Because it's a beautiful, beautiful cathedral. So the sky behind is very wispy clouds, high cirrus clouds. So a little bit of blue, a little bit of white. It looks like it's morning, maybe, hard to know, or dawn or something. And the cathedral itself is, like, the stone is kind of brown and ash, and then the windows really make this nice sort of bluish reflection of the sky, and it's kind of echoed in your clothing. And this white horse, this image is so good. So can you talk about, first of all, either the architecture or when you look back and you think back, and when you look at this image, what is the essence of why this is such a potentially inspiring image?
Well, again, almost nobody does a horseback Camino, so that in itself makes it unique. But to have that image of me, only me and my horse, whose name was Picasso, in front of the cathedral is incredible.
Awesome.
So one of the problems I have as a writer is I tend to write niche books. So this is a niche of a niche of a niche book. So, who's going to buy the book? But anybody who really wants to have a unique experience, this is going to be my next book, is why it's the last photo I sent to you. I've already written about walking the Camino, and now I'm going to write a smaller book about riding, the horseback riding. So art and architecture is one of the things I love. And in my first book, there's a lot of art and architecture. And it's something, you could do an art history course by walking the Camino.
For sure.
Because, you'll see Romanesque churches, and then you'll see low Gothic and middle Gothic, high Gothic, and then you go on to everything from Rococo to Baroque to all of this. But this cathedral, the specific one in Santiago, is the third church that was built on this site. So in 822, they built the first one. It was just a tiny place. Then all these pilgrims started coming, so they built a bigger one, and then and then more and more people are coming, so they built the cathedral, which is there now, and it is a gorgeous cathedral, and they've just finished fixing it up, repairing it, cleaning it, doing everything that they needed to do to get ready for this year and last year, which are Jubilee years.
Okay.
They're special years when a door called the Holy Door is opened, and as a Catholic, if you believe in what the church tells you, if you walk through that holy door, you get special indulgences, which cuts off the amount of time it takes you to get to heaven, as opposed to spending more time in purgatory, where you have to make up for all your sins while you were on earth. Anyway, it's a special year, so they did a lot of work in cleaning it up. And it's a beautiful cathedral. It's Gothic, and it's not as magnificent, I would say, as two other cathedrals on the route, which are the cathedral in Burgos and the cathedral in Leon. That shot that I did before on the cathedral windows on my first book, that's the stained glass windows from Leon Cathedral, and they are spectacular.
Wow.
This cathedral it's spiritual and emotional, because you go there and you know that St. James is buried there, but it's been the place where millions of pilgrims over the years have come. So it's you feel all the way along the Camino that you're traveling in the footsteps of so many other people who've come before you.
Yep, I know that feeling for sure. Basically, you walk around the old city of Jerusalem, and you're very much aware of, oh, wow, this is like where people walked 2,000 years ago, getting their produce and doing their and there's a connection. Do you feel that in doing this pilgrimage, like, how did that shape your subconscious? There are going to be things that bubble up from your subconscious that are not necessarily significant or they're meaningful to you, but aren't keys to some other world. But as a subjective experience, as you doing this on a horse, which is a very intimate connection to another being, because you are basically being carried. And like, I know enough about horses to know that some of them are jerks and some of them are sweet and some of them, so why don't you talk about what that was like to be on a horse and how that infused itself into your subconscious?
Well, I mentioned I grew up riding, but because of my profession and my life, I haven't ridden much in my older adulthood. So I knew I was going to have to train for this adventure. I started riding in May, and I quickly realized that things weren't quite right.
Okay.
I should be getting accustomed to riding, but I was in a lot of pain. And I mean, after an hour on horseback, I was in a lot of pain. And to do this Camino, I would have to be on horseback 4 to 6 hours a day.
Wow.
So I kept training all summer, and at the end, I said, okay, either I cancel and don't go, or I just accept that I cannot do this the way I thought I was going to do it. Maybe I'll just ride 1 hour a day, and that's it. That's all I can do. So that I contacted the trip organizer, and they said they could accommodate that. So I just went on. So I would say that what happened to me, it's I don't know, I don't want to overemphasize this, but I was not aware I had back problems, and I learned I had back problems, and that's what's causing the pain. And it's like, all right, I'm not 50 years old anymore. I'm not even 40. I mean, 60. I am getting up there, and I have to accept this.
Right.
And I have to accept that my ambition and my desire, sometimes it won't happen. I can't do it. I have to be willing to settle for less. And that's, for me, hard. So,
I want to say, sister, you're hitting home, because I just hit 50, or I'm hitting 50 or whatever, and And I know it's essentially over time, the curve just decreases. But, life is a gift and we make every second count. Seems to me that the ambition or the vision or the aspiration of, oh, I'll ride for 6 hours a day and it'll be great. And then you're actually on a horse for an hour and you're just like, you know what? This is a lot. My body is not quite up to the challenge. So it's a very meditative Zen awareness, I guess. I mean, you tell me.
Well, the interesting thing was I ended up, I'd never done it in all my training, but I rode 4 hours, the days that 4 hours had to be ridden. I rode one day 6 hours, and another day was supposed to be 6 hours. I only rode 4 hours, but I didn't think I could do that. And I really couldn't do that. And the only way I did it was I was praying constantly after about the first hour. I prayed more in that Camino than I've prayed since I was probably a teenager. So, and you're right about the connection between a person and a horse. I love horses, but to be on horseback and to be out in the countryside and the nature and going along, and the experience of being with a community of other pilgrims, it was all very, it's an experience that I will never have again. And it was unique. People talk about walking the Camino as being unique, but I could go back next week and walk the Camino again. I'm never going to be able to go back and ride the Camino. I just can't do it.
So were you always on that particular horse?
Yes, that was my designated horse for the trip.
Picasso is one hell of a good-looking horse.
He was a gentleman the whole way. I have to say that.
Amazing. Julie, the conversation is already done. It's so great.
So when I picked my photos for you, I wanted to do one about my past as a diplomat, one about my present as an author, one about my present as a publisher, and one about my future, which is a book I'm going to write about riding the Camino. So you've seen 4 times in my life.
You delivered. Thank you so much. This was great.
Rand, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and through you to your audience. And
Sure.
Boy, maybe we can meet in Jerusalem sometime in the future.
Next year in Jerusalem.
Exactly.
Or Houston. Houston is the Jerusalem of the United States.
I don't think that. Houston is an underrated city. It's a fabulous place.
I loved Houston. I've been there once. I loved it.
Shooting it raw?
Yes. Shooting it raw.